Okay.
So,
Hey.
okay, live.
Live.
Live. And just in the moment, Oya came. And Oya, when I add you to the stream, I set us to live already. Welcome.
Okay, excellent.
Hey.
Throw you into the fire. Hey.
Just
Hi.
in time. Okay, I want to give a quick introduction what this whole thing is supposed to be, mean, etc. So some of you may know that I'm maintaining a build system, and in order to, work on that, improve it, etc., I was researching some papers, and I stumbled across this very interesting paper. And let me just finish my resume
Matt?
and share my screen. Let's see where this works. Do you still see me? I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let me see. Just need to share a bit. By the way, what I should probably do first is give a bit of introduction who these people are, right? I will start with Bastian because he seems to be next to me. So we haven't actually met in person yet, but we know each other from our OSS endeavors, right? So hi, Bastian.
Hi.
And you're maintaining Snoop and Controls X, right? So maybe if people use that.
Snoop. The WPF Snoop.
Yeah.
Really?
That's mine. Yeah.
I love that application. Kudos for that, man.
Yeah, it was not originally developed by me, so
Yeah, I know.
I overtook it a few years ago.
Awesome.
So
awesome work. Yeah, perfect. I love
but still. And I looked at the contribution in Insights. It was a lot of work since then. So at least
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I had to modernize a few things like adding .NET Core support, adding ARM support recently.
Hmm.
And it's still regularly detected as malware.
Oh, really?
Yeah, quite often.
Jesus, I used it once, but I'm not exactly. It was really great and helpful, but I'm not really the WPF person. So, but yeah, really cool stuff. Next to that, we have Bogdan, and I remember we met, I think, at a conference talk in
2019, I think, end of May or something like that in Bucharest. You presented some stuff about Rider.
Yeah, it was on my tongue, but I for the love of God, I couldn't remember. Yeah, so hi Bogdan and Oya. Oya, I know also from CI/CD endeavors, and she's done a pretty cool talk about probably slightly related. I'm not sure if it fits. It probably fits into the conversation also. Your .NET template, right, with Terraform and all that.
Yeah, there's some IAC in there. Sort of fits.
Yeah. And Turo, I think the only person here that I met in person already. You're muted.
Yeah. We had beer.
We had beer, yeah. And yeah, welcome everyone. So I will share my document. Let's see. Share screen, and let's look at this document. Okay, here it comes. So you should no, not yet. Goddamn, where is it? Here. Okay, so now you should see something. And this document I built from a paper that I found, and the paper is called, I will just give the headline here, It's an empirical characterization of bad practices in continuous integration. And basically what I did is they have a couple, it's a really great paper, I have to say. In the subsections, those basically reflect what we have here with these different topics or subtopics in CI/CD, which are repository infrastructure, basic process, maintainability, quality assurance, delivery process, and culture. And the idea was pretty much to have a meeting several times with interested people and just have some talks, basically. Nothing really planned. So for everyone who's watching, I gave a couple of questions out before we met here, but just some very basic stuff. So for me, starting with this topic of infrastructure, I know absolutely nothing about infrastructure and infrastructure as code, etc. So Kubernetes, Terraforms, that's all. How do you call it? That's a black hole for me, or how would you say it in English? Oh yeah.
Black hole, void, sure. I mean, there's multiple ways you can say it, but I think that the black hole analogy gets used quite often. So I think you did well.
Void was actually the one. Every developer should know that, right? Void, public void main. Okay. So I have no idea how do we start. First, I will stop sharing my screen. And maybe I have an intro question, definitely. And let me see, where were my questions? Here. The first question for me is, those people who think they already are, or I know there are people who are proficient in that topic, but what exactly is that kind of stuff giving you? Where do you use it? Or how can you just describe it in a short few sentences? Anyone wants to start?
So,
or yeah.
Whoever wants to go. If you want to start, go for it.
No, just please.
I was gonna say, I mean, that's a very loaded question, right? Like, what does it like cover? As far as I guess it really depends on where you are, right? Like in some places it could cover like just the hardware pieces, or like if you're working in like a physical data center, or working with VMs, with like networking and things like that. And nowadays, we're seeing a different approach where like the cloud, where everything's in the cloud. Well, not everything, but like there are a lot of things in the cloud. You still have to worry about some networking pieces. You still have to think about virtual machines if you're running those, but now, there's a whole layer on top of that as like platform as a service from infrastructure as a service. So at this point, it really has become more of a broad term, just because it requires a lot of generalist knowledge, because it could start anywhere from, just changing your code, like setting up your code in such a way to be able to work with specific PaaS offerings, to understanding what these PaaS offerings are, to also understanding how the underlying infrastructure works enough to know what's happening, but you might not have to like maintain it as much. But yeah, so very, very broad.
I'm gonna be honest. If I look at I also have a test account for Azure, and if I look at the dashboard, it's completely overwhelming for me. I have no idea what I do. I mean, even the probably most simple thing, like publishing a website, let's say, I wouldn't have an idea where to start exactly. And it's interesting. I would say I have knowledge with CI/CD, but that topic is like a whole universe on its own, right? Like you said, it's a loaded question also.
Yeah, it's almost like the paradox of choice, where how when you have too many choices to make, it's a lot more difficult to make a choice. So they give you a lot of different different options for how you want to run your stuff. So there might not be like a one specific way that you want to host a website, or, you know, it depends. And so like, that's why people get like certifications for these things. I mean, certifications have existed for a long time, but I think for me to like fully get up to speed with Azure, like I actually had to, like I used the certification process to kind of pick at like different areas so I can like get a general knowledge about those, coming from, you know, having no cloud experience, working in just like a standard data center that is like a private cloud for people. So yeah, very difficult.
Yeah, and at least in the field that I'm currently working in, this brings a lot of additional questions, because as you said, it's a whole universe on its own, and it's usually a very very hard thing for developers to just grasp all of it, and this becomes a question of how you're going to structure your teams in your organization, because it's not only the thing that they need to know how to work with Azure or its resources or AWS or whatever, or if they're even doing their own infrastructure on their own bare metal or whatever. But the question is, which I'm getting a lot of from developers and from our teams, is how do I know which infrastructure I should use? Because you're faced with a problem that you have a service or an application that you need to run. So what do I use? Do I use containers? Do I use Azure App Service? Do I use Windows or Linux? Do I need a gateway? How do I guard my database? All of that stuff is such a broad thing that you start to get really lost inside of it, and we are constantly battling with this question and problem. Do we leave that to the teams to try to figure out and decide and gather all of that knowledge for themselves, how infrastructure works and how infrastructure is supposed to be built and secure and stable and backed up and GDPR, and or we need somebody who knows all of that and guide them in this process? And this is a very, at least in my eyes, a very basic DevOps problem and question on how do you spread that knowledge. And because at least how I see it is that the idea of DevOps culture is to really not have that knowledge centralized, not having a DevOps team or people who understand that. But then again, maybe you need some kind of a horizontal team that helps you out with all of that and gets you started. And yeah, it's really hard, at least for me.
Yeah. Yes and no. In a way, it's like it's good to have a central team that is able to at least worry about like any sorts of central tooling and coming up with like new standards and practices and ways to move forward. But like DevOps culture is more about collaboration, right? So like knowledge sharing and like being able to like sort of I guess when you're thinking about like, you know, how generalists are becoming more popular, like somebody who is maybe like a T-shaped personality, where like somebody has like a deep level of knowledge in one thing and like a shallow level of knowledge and like a bunch of other things. So I feel like we're kind of seeing this happen in an organization standpoint, or like around the tooling and the things that we use. It's
Yeah. And at least for me, it's becoming an issue, because I get all of this pushback from people who don't want to get into the field of infrastructure because it's hard, because it requires a lot of knowledge. And yet again,
I think that's I mean, at least for me, that's the issue. So far, the only thing I've done with my, the things that I develop is pushing to NuGet, let's say, maybe uploading to an FTP to have a static website, or GitHub Action, not GitHub Actions, but GitHub Pages for my blog, let's say. Or what else? Providing an installer, also just GitHub release pages, right? And all that. But from which point, probably also important to know, from which point is it necessary to dive into that topic, infrastructure? When is it necessary, really?
When you start to get in trouble. So
Like
when something stops to work, you have to dive in.
Like having the basic troubleshooting skills, understanding, networking, like maybe not in depth, but at least to know where to go to see if something's missing, like a subnet and access restrictions or something like that. Or there's, there's so many ways of doing networking in the cloud these days too, but like at least having the ability to look at your requests to try to, like, I don't know, even having like an understanding of tools like, say, TCP dump or something like that to like see if you're getting a specific set of traffic, like that I think is important. Like you don't have to know like the nitty gritty, but at least you have to know of like, hopefully you have some central logging location. You can like parse through logs somehow. And like having basic networking skills and like understanding of how things sort of get hosted. Like it doesn't have to, like, you don't have to be an expert at these things, but you have to know, especially like when you're stuck, you have to know what questions to ask. And I think that's the most important part. Because if you know what questions to, go ahead, sorry.
And who to ask, not only what questions to ask, but who to ask, because this, at least for us, is a big problem. Because, okay, I have a bunch of questions that I have no idea about, and I don't know who should be telling me that. Should I try some architect or some DevOps person, or do I go to the internet and Stack Overflow, or
Well, what kind of questions are these? So, for instance, if I would start, I'm starting small now. I'm implementing an Azure function, or AWS Lambda, I think it's called, right? And I host that. What kind of problems may I expect? A big bill, maybe, if I don't properly set up my account, right, for billing.
I hope you have alerts on that.
You have alerts on that.
I hope you do. Like that's a good practice to have, especially if you're getting into any of the clouds. Having like budgets and cost alerts is very important, because it's so easy to just pick an option or stick with like a default option that costs you like thousands of dollars without realizing what it does.
Well, I've
that never happened to me ever.
I've heard they're pretty forgiving in that case. So if they see you haven't actually used the processing power or something, then some of the providers are generous enough to say, okay, last time, now set those damn thresholds.
I simply didn't provide billing info, so that's even easier than an alert.
You probably have the how's it called, the credits from MVP status.
I don't have an MVP status. They declined me 2 times, so I stopped applying. No, I'm using the Visual Studio benefits from my employer. I somehow managed to get the credits from my employer into my private account. I don't know how it works, but it works.
Don't say anything about it at work. Yeah, it never happened.
So I'm running everything.
Then please tell me privately afterwards.
Yeah, I can. So I'm using just those credits to prevent excessive bills. So if the credits are gone, everything just stops.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can have that.
Jesus.
most of the providers can cut you off when your credits are out, or when you have some billing threshold that you surpass, and they say, okay, that's it. Sorry, no more compute for you. That's it.
So I never gave out a credit card number or something like that to Azure, so they couldn't even bill me.
I'm gonna be honest. I had some credits too. I don't know through which program, but whatever. But even then, I was worried that they may come after me. And yeah, I also didn't provide credit card, etc. But they still had my mail, so I was like, okay, better make sure you pick the right plan. Which is, I don't know. I started trying something like hosting a website, but even that is, I don't know. It's more difficult than it used to be. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. I hosted a lot of private websites, primarily in the past, and tried to use Azure, but it was kind of difficult because you've got so many choices, and then you've got to create some resource and another resource and a database, and the dashboard just floods you with all that information.
And then they come out with some new thing that is way easier and cheaper than the thing that you were trying to use. And now it's going to take so much effort to try to like move all your stuff to this other cheaper, better thing.
Yeah, and they don't have migration scripts, so it takes you like years to migrate one virtual machine, as in my case. So I had one virtual machine on the old resource thingy in Azure, and then they introduced the, how it's called, resource manager or something, and asked me to migrate like 100 times because your time is running out, and it took me really years to finally make the step to migrate it.
Yeah, I mean, with that said, they do try to offer some tools like to assist specific migrations. You just have to know that, like, to look for those tools. Like, they do have like a database migration assistant if you're like, say, like are trying to like migrate your database to Azure SQL, and they'll tell you all of the things that are wrong. You don't have access to the underlying operating system, so you have to like get rid of your distributed transactions, SSIS jobs, things like that, because they're no longer supported. But then you find out that they are supported in this one specific case, and then like it becomes a mess. But they do have tools that might at least help you like inch a little bit closer.
Yeah, but you have to get to know those tools too and how to use them. And
but that's
for me, it was too much effort for too little benefit. Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do in this case, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I try to look to, let's say, the most generic tool, because I only have that much time I can use for learning tools. So I try to pick something which is very generic, so I can use it in most cases. For instance, containers, right? So if you acquire this skill, then you can use it no matter whether you are using a data center, Azure, AWS, or something else. So since we have so many options, I rather go for the one which will provide me the most benefits. Right? We all have 24 hours a day. Yeah. So you can't learn everything. Right now, I spent 1.5 years working on a web application for the financial sector running in Azure. And we only used some of those services, for instance, App Service, Azure SQL, Azure Functions, Blob Storage, Power BI, but there are hundreds.
Let me throw some question. Why do I need a blob storage?
If you want to store files.
Because it's cheaper.
Yeah, you can use a blob storage for other means. For instance, to host your static site or some resources, you just files, basically files, images, PDFs.
So if is that a default actually also? I mean, if I plan to host a website on Azure, would I automatically use blob storage?
No, there are many. You could use static sites, or you could use an app service, or you could use containers or Kubernetes. So just stick to one tool. You learn this tool very well, and then whenever you feel like I have this shortcoming, is there any other things to some other alternatives? Because you know this one tool very well, you can easily compare it to others, right? Because you know it so well, and then you can switch to another, or just stick to your own guns. You know them; they are good enough for you, right? So I was trying to say that even after 1.5 years in Azure, we were only using a bunch of services, but there are so many others, and this is just one cloud provider.
Mm-hmm.
What if you are switching the project and you have to work for I don't know, a client who's using AWS? You only know Azure, so yeah, that you are going to see similarities. For instance, you have S3 in AWS, in Azure it's called blob storage or something like that. But up to a point, then each provider has its own things, buttons, switches to use.
It reminds me so much of car makers. You know, everyone has their Active-Tronic and whatnot or Park Assistant, fancy name edition, and E-Tronic. Oh my God! I mean, completely obscure for the end user. You have no idea. I mean, you know the concept, etc. Like you said, from one provider that you used. You go to the next one, and even the concepts have fancy names just to, I don't know, marketing stuff. But it's not transparent in that case. I wonder if that's even a good marketing, because you make it harder for people to switch to a certain degree. Maybe, I don't know.
Of course,
I think that's why cloud consulting is a big thing right now too, is to be able to, because there are a lot of people who get overwhelmed with this kind of stuff and, you know, have to migrate from one cloud to another, or do multi-cloud, or like understand what all of these things are. So having like consultants, somebody who might not be there forever, but might be able to help you get set up and explain some of the benefits to you from some of the services could be worth the cost in the long run than trying to research all of the things yourself, or, you know, get certified, which even then, like, you know, you have to make sure that you're actually internalizing that knowledge and not just, you know, studying for a test. And so yeah, and I think that's another case for centralized teams. And I'm not calling them DevOps teams. I would call them like platform teams, because like that's what I'm currently on. But in general, just so people don't get confused between the terminology of DevOps team versus DevOps culture, thinking that DevOps, like implementing DevOps, is for a specific team rather than the department as a whole. So, but yeah, like having like a centralized platform team that like does research and innovation, like R&D, while also like being able to guide like teams with their services. And like, I think that's really important. So yeah, because it is confusing.
Yeah, and I've always liked this concept, because I'm also seeing it applied in a lot of big organizations who are really adopting DevOps culture. And what they have is this, they call them tooling teams or infrastructure teams or whatever. So basically, these are the people that are creating all of the tools that you need in order to be able to deploy your application, to monitor your application, and so on and so forth, because they have the knowledge, they have the way of making that application work, making it secure, because security is another different topic that people are like, what, I have to do that also? I'm like, and they're like,
And it becomes a thing that people think or like see as gatekeeping as opposed to something that could benefit them. So I think with security, well, security is one of the big ones, especially if you have like a centralized security team that's giving you standards and like giving you things that you have to follow. You know, people are likely to, like, if you don't implement it right, or even implement your security team right, and make them seem like gatekeepers for making changes, saying like at this point we have to stop and do this, at this point we have to stop and do this, we have to like send it out to this place or these people to check these things and then send it back, or have like a giant checklist of things to do. I mean, that's the importance of automation. You can kind of like automate a lot of the security stuff into it, but like that's more of like the importance of communication, is like now that everything is shifting left in this SDLC cycle, like there are more opportunities for people to push back because they think they're getting like so many more responsibilities. And like I said, I think security is like one of those that people are like, ugh, like this is just preventing me from doing all of these things. But
yeah, especially developers, they see security as a block. They see it as a thing that is stopping them from doing their work. And they're like, okay, I wrote this awesome code and it's doing this amazing thing, and I have this service which is fast and everything and blah 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 blah. And then the security guy comes and no, you can't use that library, you can't expose that port, you can't do that, you can't do that. And he was like, what? And the fighting starts, and it's always what I especially about DevOps, what I see it tries to achieve is bring those two camps together so they don't fight about that, so that they have a common ground on how things are being done. Otherwise, they're just two opposite direction people that fight about the same thing. They all want that service to be great, but just in different shape and form.
Yeah, and here you can use the infrastructure. For instance, in this project I was talking about, because it was targeting industry, financial industry. Of course, we had this tool for scanning our source code, be it .NET, Node.js, or Python, scanning all the libraries, front and back end, and would report hundreds of issues. For instance, I'm not sure whether you heard about log injection. It's a very nice little thing where you can actually fold the application into logging stuff, which everybody else thinks has happened, but it's just like a SQL injection. So this thing, I have implemented this feature, and then security stops me to deliver it, right? I've put so many hours into developing this nice little thing, and then security guy says, no, you have this vulnerability, that library is obsolete, you have this security CVE code, something. And my guess is, from my personal experience, I felt that if I would get this feedback at an earlier stage, that's moving left, it would really help me, because instead of using that library, which is, I don't know, contains a host of security vulnerabilities, I might have chosen a different one. So why I'm saying infrastructure can help you with that. If you have the means to provide feedback as early as possible about security, deployments, I don't know, stuff, then all people will have the choice of doing things better, to avoid frustration. Hey, I've spent a week and then this guy is just blocking me. No. The business will avoid frustration, because the developer will know, okay, I cannot use this library because the license is not valid, is not compliant with the policy of my company. How do I know this? Because when I commit my first change, the pipeline will also include a security scan, which will break the build because I have this uncomplied license, and I can find it. I should find it in, I don't know, less than 1 hour. But if the process of scanning takes hours, is very expensive, so you cannot run concurrent scanning, then of course you will end up in this situation where everybody is frustrated because they find out way too late about all these issues, right? So with the infrastructure, you should be able to provide the means to get feedback as early as possible. Feedback about whatever, not enough documentation, not enough code coverage, not enough security, not enough whatever. With carefully planned infrastructure, you can achieve this. It's not impossible, but it takes effort and it takes money and skill.
Yeah. Good point, actually, and I saved a lot of points actually now for a few minutes already. So first, I think even in the document we already had this. We had this topic as a separate bullet point, which is at one point security. So scanning for packages that may have vulnerabilities, and also the licensing question that you brought in. And I think the licensing question was also brought up by Daniel, who also just left a comment. I'll come back to the comment in a second. One thing I want to share here, and let me share my screen again. Where is it? This one? Yeah. This is pretty new. I think this one here. You don't see it yet. This one is pretty new. So NuGet has a new command that checks for CVE. First time I read that, actually. I mean, not the blog post, but those abbreviations. So GHSA. What is it? So first, the common vulnerability exposures and GitHub security advisory. So they have a new command, and most of us should be .NET developers, if I'm not wrong. They have a new command that you can invoke on your solution or package project, and it will print out basically a report if you have vulnerable packages, like here in this case Umbraco forms, for instance, and you can include transitive packages or not, which should probably be the default if you ask me, because you always want to know about all the vulnerabilities. But anyway, yeah. And it's funny, I mean, we're drifting a bit into the CI/CD pipeline area, but it's funny because previously I always thought, okay, why would you want to have a separate target or build step for restoring your project, right? Because you could do that in the compile step, let's say. It always felt a bit artificial. But now with that command, actually, it's a pretty good way. It's something that you want to put before the compilation and after the restore. You have the packages, you can scan them, and if you have critical packages, you don't even want to compile anything more. Let's say the same goes for license questions, right? For license, how do you call it?
License compliance management or something like that, yeah. Like White Source or Black Duck, or there are millions of tools.
Yeah.
But my thing is this package command, which will list all the vulnerable packages in your solution, is just one way, because it only covers NuGet packages. But what if you're using if you are building an enterprise solution, maybe you will have different languages there, maybe some Java parts, some Python parts, and they all have their own packages. So it will blow in your face like hundreds of issues without you. So for instance, we experienced this very nasty thing. We were deploying this Python application in Azure as a Docker container. We haven't touched that code base for a while. And out of the sudden, it stopped working. And one of the guys investigated and found that one of our Python packages would have this transitive dependency, which wasn't compatible anymore. We haven't touched the code, but because one of our packages would list any version greater than, it worked, the author of that transitive dependency pushed a new version, which wasn't compatible with our code. So even if we haven't changed the code, the application was no longer running. Same with these security vulnerabilities. You haven't touched your code base in 6 months, then a smart guy detects a vulnerability in one of your packages. I don't know, it took them 1 year to find it out. And then they publish this CVE report. Your scanning tool will download the definition of these CVE numbers, and during the night will report that you have some major or critical security vulnerability. And you are saying, but I haven't even touched my code in like 6 months. But then, hey, you need to fix it, right? And then you have this guy who said, the gatekeeper, you cannot go to production because you have these many issues. And then what? So unfortunately, you cannot avoid these situations. But as mentioned before, with infrastructure, you can at least have feedback as early as possible, right? And specifically with these packages, what you could do to protect yourself, instead of going to the public galleries like NuGet Gallery or, I don't know, PEEP site or whatever, all the places or the free public places where people put their stuff into, you could host your own repositories. And then, and then you will have a bunch of people who have all the checks approved, and only this guy will populate these repositories with the packages, and the rest of the company will use a secure repository, right? And then you scan it for licenses, for vulnerabilities, for, I don't know, whatever stuff. So then you have a healthy base of packages, approved packages from all points of view, and your people can only use those. So security-wise and license-wise, you are covered. But then your people will start complaining, hey, but I cannot use that package because it's not in the safe repository. Can you push it for me? And then you have a lot of discussion. And so unfortunately, even this is not 100% sure.
I mean, you can make that process sort of automated, like depending on what you use to determine that your packages are secure, like what you're using to like scan it or see what the vulnerabilities are, you can automate that process. So if somebody wants to use a specific package, yeah, it might take some time to do vulnerability scans, but if it's like all the common packages that you use are already in that repo, it's fine. But if you want to add like one more, you might just have to do a specific scan or like check for vulnerabilities in that specific way. You just have to be able to have a way to do it without like, because that seems like a lot of it seems like an automated process already. So you shouldn't have to have like a security team that gatekeeps you from doing that. It should be like a self-service thing. And then it adds it to that repository of approved packages.
Yeah, you could have your own pipeline. This was one of the, I have, let's say, a very long list of things I would like to have the chance of experimenting with. And one of these ideas was to have a pipeline to push this package you need into this repository. For instance, in Azure DevOps, you have these Azure artifacts, which can act as a source of a NuGet feed. So my idea was, I want to...
that's also, just a quick question, that's also a servers under the Azure umbrella, let's say?
Yeah.
Just a quick moment. Let me share my screen again.
Sure.
And I would like, maybe for a couple of things that we discussed, it would be interesting just to see if, because like I said before, some things are very... I mean, most stuff here is like overwhelming to me personally. I think I've done something with functions, for instance, but if you say like the, how was it called? Azure artifacts, is that something that actually...
That's part of, that the artifacts are part of Azure DevOps, so the CI solution.
So you won't find it under the portal.
Yeah, the place you're doing your builds. But I see another problem with your portal. It's a light theme.
Yeah, what's up with that?
What's up with that?
That's just wrong.
It's I'm blind. I can't.
I have 180 degree astigmatism, so no, I can also read. I don't know. Even my dashboard isn't functional anymore. I just went there and it told me not found. But yeah, let me where's the pipeline, because I just want to see if we talk about that. I think it might be interesting to see that also. Let me share my screen again.
The pink one at the bottom, yeah.
This one. Yeah. Okay. Not logged in almost.
You can create feeds here and have NuGet packages, npm packages, Maven packages, Python packages,
Docker images, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
So my idea was to have this pipeline. You check the package with all your tools, I don't know, Snyk, whatever, scanners, licenses. If the build passes, then you push the package into this repository. Maybe you have an automated email sent to everybody, hey, you have available this new package in your corporate repository. Start using it, right? So yeah, as Olia said, this should be automated, right? And everybody could propose, hey, I want this package to be added to our repository. Is it possible? Okay, run this build and you'll find out. And that should be easy peasy, right? Just use the appropriate infrastructure.
So the NuGet server we use at work, it's ProGet, has automatic license filtering at least. I don't know how it's about vulnerability scanning, but at least they can restrict the licenses you can use.
Right, so it's, you have some of the problems already fixed for you. You just need to take care about the other.
Does anybody find it funny how, like, back in the 90s or early 2000s, like, if you were into computers, you were like, you kind of knew all the things, like, right? You knew how, like, the hardware worked, you knew how the operating system worked, you, like, knew how the like, how to host a website, like, programming, all of those things. I'm not saying, like, if you were into computers, you definitely knew those things, but you were more likely to know all of those things. And then, like, as technology evolved and more things, like, got more features, like this operating system is now, like, so many different has so many different, like, pieces to it to be able to manage and do all that stuff. This other thing, like, you need a networking person to understand all of these things, you need, like, another person to understand all of these things. So, like, progressively we've become more siloed and more specialized. So now some developers we got to the point where, like, some developers didn't really understand some of the processes on the infrastructure side, and vice versa. Like, a lot of people who deal with infrastructure don't really know much about programming, but now it's starting to kind of come back together, right? Like, now with, like, DevOps, with automation, with all of this stuff, like, everything's becoming blurred. And so, like, you have to think about infrastructure even ahead of time. Like, even knowing how to write some code is important, because, like, say I want to use like an Azure offering, say I want to use, like, Key Vault or an Azure, like, configuration or something, to be able to pull specific configurations and things from Azure and into my code. But, like, I have to understand that this is what I need to do, that this is where it's hosted, how it works, just, like, to be able to understand, like, oh, I need to use this library to be able to, be able to get my, like, use my credentials or get, like, a managed identity or get something to be able to reach out to those services and, like, pull the things that I need. So, like, everything is kind of, so I feel like, and I know the comment was made, like, we're getting more into the CI/CD at this point, but that's, like, such a hard thing, like, such a hard cutoff to make, because, like, that doesn't really exist as much anymore, because everything is so, like, kind of melding together. Anyway, I thought it was funny how, like, there were more generalists before, then everybody became specialized, and now everything's coming back together.
Yeah, it seems like a cycle that is happening years after years, and To be honest, I've always, since I've started getting into DevOps and trying to evangelize that, I'm more and more thinking that this is the way that people really need to put all those different specialities, to harmonize them, and to. I know that basically that means you should know more stuff, and you should learn more stuff, and you should be interested in more stuff in general. But it's starting to get me that a lot of people have problem with that, and a lot of people don't want to do that.
Well, change is a constant in this thing. You can't, like, that is the nature of the field. Like, change
exactly.
So what you can do is embrace the change and try to make your system more resilient to change, or like easier to change, so it doesn't become as painful. Like somebody said, if it, like, I don't remember whether it was like in a book or I was like looking at a talk, but they're saying like, if it hurts, do it more. Like if this is a painful process, then do this process more until it becomes less painful.
Yeah, exactly. And this is always my comeback at people who say, okay, I just want to program, I don't want to learn new stuff around infrastructure, around security, around Docker, Kubernetes, Azure, AWS, whatever. And I'm always say, okay, do you want to learn new stuff about programming? And they're like, yeah, I want, I'm a programmer. And I said, well, it's the same thing. It's a different area, but it's new knowledge. So the same way you're learning new stuff about development patterns or whatever, or C#8 and new keywords, and I don't care. The same way you have to learn what Kubernetes is, you have to learn what a Docker file is, how do you populate it, what is a gateway, how do you do some virtual network stuff.
Yeah,
things like that.
But they're just the basics, right? Like you don't have to be an expert in all of those things. So you could still mainly be a developer. Like, but we like have to think about it as a collective, right? Like relying on people and knowing which questions to ask, things like that. We're like the Borg now, right? Like we are a collective. So like we're a collective brain. And so we have to communicate with one another to get the information that we need. And yeah, and then that's how you succeed. So like change is a constant. People are always going to have to like embrace change, but they don't have to like, it doesn't have to mean that you have to become an expert in all of these things. It just means like knowing enough to be able to do some basic troubleshooting and going to the right people to help.
Yeah, make friends. For instance, I worked at the company where we were providing automation services for a bunch of Java applications. We were dealing with Jenkins. We had some pipelines written using the Groovy syntax, so Jenkins files. We were also using Ansible to provision some QA environments, running a cluster of applications, dealing with Docker and some other stuff. And okay, I started as a software developer in 2004, so that's my bread and butter, developing software. But then I kind of I have encountered issues like deploying applications, doing manual stuff, reading, I don't know, pages of Word document, how to deploy an application. And I thought, okay, there's got to be a better way. I cannot learn all. As I told you, I only have like 24 hours a day. But I had this guy who was certified in AWS, who knew a lot of stuff about Ansible and Bash and stuff. And I used his knowledge. I relied upon his help. And one day he told me, why don't you order hardware, install Proxmox on it, and then you can create your virtual machines to experiment with your automation services. So I wasn't aware of that tool. He helped me to put all this stuff together. So infrastructure, like hardware, we basically requested a physical machine with some CPU gigs and some SSDs, because my team would need to create and destroy virtual machines to experiment with a lot of tools. So going to IT department, create that VM, destroy it, recreate that, it was pretty much a hassle. And having this box in our office, it would help us in better utilize the resources. We were in control, but we used the knowledge of this guy. So he told us about Proxmox. He told us, you can actually request a physical machine from IT. I mean, I wouldn't have the courage to go to IT asking for stuff like that, right? So this guy helped us. He knew networking. He knew security, a lot of things. We relied upon his knowledge. And then because of this foundation, we were able to provide better automation services. He also introduced us to Rancher, which is a container management platform. So as I told you, we were offering these automation services for different projects, and these projects would need their QA environment where people would deploy their application, and then the QA engineer would test it. But then you would have to go again to the IT department requesting at least 3 virtual machines to set up this environment. And then with Rancher, we would just use Docker containers. We had to pay the price of learning this platform, right? But then once we learn it, and once we had the first project using Rancher, the rest of them were much easier. So we didn't learn from zero. We used the help of this friend, right? So you don't have to be expert in all of these areas, but just go to the right people and collaborate. I mean, that's one of the biggest things in DevOps. We are developers. Me, myself, I'm employed as a developer right now, but I'm also collaborating with a DevOps engineer in my team. But then you see the developers, you see the operations, and now instead of having these people collaborate and communicate, there is the third party called DevOps, right? So instead of having 2 silos, now we have 3 silos, right? It's pretty funny. But yeah, so I rely upon collaborating with people to learn stuff from there, to avoid paying the full learning fee, and ask for help a lot.
Yeah, and that's the important thing, is like knowing or like being able to allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to ask specific questions that even if you feel like you should already know them, but and then also like building empathy with people and understanding to be able to like answer those questions for them too, because they probably have those questions too. But as far as like DevOps culture goes, like they do suggest, like that's why they suggest like at least one ops person on a team, so that way like you might have a central team, but then you also have somebody on each team to be able to kind of be that sort of proxy for you, to be able to like take care of the DevOps or the automation pieces and the provisioning and things like that for your team, and then like working with like a central team for like the bigger things. So that way like that communication flow is a little bit better, and you don't have to worry about like going to a different team to be able to get the answers that you need for like a specific automation piece when you have somebody there that's dedicated to you. Some say you can form like a committee where it's like you have people that kind of like from different teams that kind of gather together like on a regular basis and be able to share that the knowledge of like what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and like work on shared initiatives. So like that's helpful as well to cultivate communication. But I think like right now that's like the biggest thing in the tech landscape that people like tend to take for granted is that communication piece. Like a lot of like I know there are a lot of developers and a lot of like infrastructure people or a lot of like tech workers that just kind of want to do like individual work and don't really want to talk to anybody.
Stare at each other basically.
I guess. I don't know, but like I think building empathy and communication is like how you move forward, especially these days, especially with so much information to assimilate.
True. I want to address something. Actually, I left it unnoticed for so long. Let me share my screen again. Where is it? Here. That Daniel gave a couple of recommendations before regarding learning, etc. So first was a cloud guru. And I think the second one was, let me just put the comment there. There you have it. So I don't know, probably good for me to check those out, and probably more particularly about Azure, because I don't have any credits with Google. But anyways, second comment he left was, at Olga, welcome to the world of VUCA, this stuff. And I actually had to look that up because I have no idea what it means. Volatility,
yeah.
God damn it, that's a hard word. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I'm glad I have the German translation underneath, because I wasn't sure about volatility. Yeah. So, and one thing I probably would also like to do is before, and it's a slight step back, but before we discuss security checks, I just want to, that's probably mainly for me. I have no idea, but Bogdan, you mentioned there's some other
Sneak
checks for. Yeah, actually,
Sneak.
I've seen that. Why? Yeah.
And Black Duck. Black Duck. Yeah, Black Duck.
By the way, if anyone wants to add something more, you also have the link. I mean, everyone on the chat here.
I think there are even more tools. So what I've seen lately, for instance, with Kubernetes, just to pick one big ecosystem. In the past 2-3 years,
I just wait. Just 1 second. The second, and then I'm done, and then we can continue. The second one I wanted to note was about artifacts, and for that we discussed ProGet, which is probably more the NuGet ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. No, it's also can be used for NPM, Docker images, everything.
Really?
So it's more like a repository management tool, not just NuGet hosting service, right?
Okay. Exactly. Artifactory is like that too.
Yeah,
I like them. Yeah.
They've chosen a poor name, really. ProGet sounds so much like NuGet. Okay, so I would just name them. The second one was Artifactory, and then also we had
Azure Artifacts.
Fair comparison then?
Sorry?
At a fair, I mean, list, does it fit?
Yeah, I think so.
That's JFrog, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And even GitHub has their own repository.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. They have repository for images, for NuGet, whatever.
I've had issues with their the packages that I've tried hosting there.
Everyone had.
Yeah.
So most of our artifacts just end up in TeamCity.
Yeah, true. But do you know, since you use both, I have to keep an eye out for Tudor, because I guess that was by accident. Yes, seemed so. Welcome back. But since you use both ProGet and the TeamCity feed, TeamCity is really just for NuGet, right? Or is that also for different others?
I don't know. I just do .NET development, so I don't know about the other possibilities in TeamCity.
But then it will store all the build artifacts, right? Whatever those may be.
In TeamCity?
Yeah, I mean, when you are building something and then you have created some artifact, it will be stored in that build in that TeamCity server, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not stored externally.
Right.
But you can use TeamCity as a NuGet feed provider.
Yeah.
So we don't do that because of storage limitations and stuff like that, and because storing every build in as a NuGet dependency in TeamCity would be too much for us.
Yeah. Retention policies.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can do that too. Sure.
It's pretty interesting. So at my company, and I found this really interesting when I joined. They have a pretty large CI pipeline, and what they do as for the compile step. So the compile step is also split it into several pieces. You have like one compile stage for all the core projects, and then sitting on top of that something that is more frequently touched. And the benefit of that is when you push some changes, then you could potentially use the the previous build, or not even the previous, but the most recent version from the core packages, which are exposed as artifacts from dedicated run configurations, and then you save some compile time. Basically, same goes for tests, and they all just consume the previous build output as NuGet packages. At least that's what I remember, which is
Yeah,
we
are doing something similar, just with zip artifacts instead of NuGet packages.
Yeah.
Because a full compile in our case takes about half an hour, 45 minutes, just the compile part.
Yeah, so that's a pretty important thing about infrastructure. So you start small. You just check out the code and compile the source code, right? Then you think about how about we run some tests. Okay, so put those into the infrastructure. But then you say, hey, but I want to write some integration test. I need some database. I need some other service. How do I deal with that? And then the pipeline will need more time to execute. So basically, you also need to put the pipeline on a diet, to shave the yak, to shave everything possible to keep your pipelines as thin and as fast as possible. So with the JetBrains doing this, reusing stuff from previous builds is pretty smart. It will help you on the long run. Basically, if you have in a corporate, you have a finite amount of resources, and then what will happen on that project I was mentioning before, we actually seen that at the end of the sprint, let's say in the last 2 or 3 days when everybody was pushing to finish their features, we would create a lot of commits, and even though we had like a dozen of build agents, they were full, and you had to wait like 60 builds ahead of you. Each build would take 30 minutes. So basically, you would spend like 2 or 3 hours before your commit would have been built, because the infrastructure wasn't scalable, wasn't in the most fit.
On busy days, shape. we have wait times like 8 hours.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. It's like you only find out tomorrow if your build has failed, right?
Oh.
Yeah, if I'm unlucky, that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really unlucky.
We need way more build agents. So currently we've got around 100, but we would need like 200 or 300. Or get rid of Oracle as a database, because that's blocking the pipeline.
Yeah, database restore times tend to be pretty a pretty significant slowdown. But like, how big is the code base that you're building that it is actually taking that long? Because like I understand that like there's tests and things like that have to go on with it, but like I'm just curious to see like the relative size to that.
So it's like about 4 million lines of code mixed out of C++, VB6, and C#. So it's quite large and it's very, very old. So the oldest code is like 25 years old.
So you said VB6, right?
Yeah, I said VB6. It wasn't a mistake.
He also says C++.
C++ is okay.
And COM interop.
C++ is still a thing.
Yeah, but not if you're relying on COM heavily. So.
Yeah, okay.
By the way, I want to share this really quick. Where is it? Here, this one, I think. That's in another paper, and I found this really interesting, or funny more or less. My favorite way of thinking about build time is basically you have tea time, lunchtime, or bed time. Your builds should run in like 5-ish minutes, however long it takes to get a cup of coffee, for 40 minutes to 1 hour and a half, however long it takes to get lunch, or 8-ish hours, how long it takes to get back to work. Which sounds a bit weird, coming back to work 8 hours, but yeah, okay. Maybe if you just do the occasional, I log into my workstation and trigger the build.
I mean, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so one thing I'm starting to feel a bit relaxed that we're not the only one with a monolithic build, apparently. But how are you trying? I mean, I suppose you're trying to mitigate that, because having a build that runs for half an hour, or for God's sakes, 3 or 4 hours is not manageable, and there is a limit at some point which just throwing build agents and resources at it doesn't really work anymore and doesn't scale whatever you do. So what we are currently trying is to pursue this dream of microservices and splitting up all this monolithic stuff into different repositories that have small CI builds which run for like a minute or two and things like that. So we can try to have all of that much more parallelized, much more manageable. And for God's sakes, we don't have 100 agents. We have like, I don't know, 50 tops. And of course, they're not enough. They're never enough. What I've seen in my lifetime doing all of that is that no matter how many agents you have, they're never enough. You always need...
Exactly.
I just need one more here, just for one more build and one more test. And it's always not enough, which is another interesting point about infrastructure is how do you set up your agents? Do you set up your agents as infrastructure as code? Do you create them on demand, things like that? Because using the ones that are available from the big players like Azure and AWS and TeamCity, whatever, that can give you some hosted agents on their behalf, they never really have the things that you need. They're not really fast enough. So most of the time, at least in our case, we have our own agents, our own virtual machines that we have created for building stuff. And so recently I've tried some Terraform stuff in order to prepare some build agents as infrastructure as code so that they can spin up, do their thing, and die if we don't need them anymore. But that seems hard, at least in what
it's only hard in the beginning, I think, once you're like getting used to infrastructure as code. But as far as like having your own agents and hosted agents, I feel like, I mean, we're in a similar situation. We're breaking apart a monolithic database into microservices, and it's really easy to like make this a distributed monolith rather than just like a microservice solution, because like there are specific things that make microservices and actually worth it. And sometimes that transition period can be really painful because you're getting the worst of both worlds. But I mean, not every service is going to be a special case that's going to need everything that like need like specific things configured on the agents. Like maybe you're able to use like a hosted agent for some things versus others, and then sometimes you can split a job into multiple agents. You can use your own and a hosted one. We have that flexibility now, which I know is more difficult to manage because like one of them you control, the other one you don't really have much control over. But if you're backed up for agents, like it might be worth looking into getting some of the services that actually could be used unhosted agents on them. But yeah. Same though with like the monolithic solution. Like we've been trying to break ours apart for a while. but like you also have to make sure they all have their own data stores and they're all like very small. So like you're not sharing a database or you're not sharing like a ton of or like resources, because then it just makes it so much more difficult to manage, because it is more difficult to manage because now you have like all of these things that are split apart. But you know, now you can actually get certain features through, test it faster because you'd have less tests and like a smaller code base, less ground to scan and do anything like that. So the builds should go a lot quicker, and hopefully with less downtime or like easier recovery. So like say if you have to like redeploy something, you don't have to like wait a million years to have something like an older version come back up. Or I mean, there's resources.
Because exactly for me, one of the biggest benefits of all of that is this mantra of DevOps for fast feedback, so that you can really fast know that your build is breaking or your library that you have used is not secure enough or whatever. And if your build is like a couple of minutes, of course, when you include security checkups, it's not that, it couldn't be that fast. But if you can do it on like stretch it maximum to the nightly build, that okay, I can do all this work today, and when I come to work the next day I can see that all of those libraries are not secure or whatever, it's still a fast feedback, at least for me, because it's the next day. I didn't do so much work, right?
Yeah. What I also noticed is that you start with these pipelines, you keep adding stuff, and then the pipeline, of course, will take more time. So one way to fix this issue from the infrastructure point of view, if you're able to parallelize all the build steps in the pipeline, what I'm saying, and also to combine it with fail fast. For instance, I don't want to start running, I don't know, the end-to-end tests because they are very slow. And then after half an hour to find out that I have some, I don't know, some issue. So we should order the build steps in the pipeline to have the quickest ones runs at the beginning, right? To parallelize as much as possible. What we noticed on our machines, we would run this integration test. It would take 17 minutes with, let's say, workstations like i7, 16 gigs of RAM and SSDs, which is pretty slow, if you ask me. But then what we did, we changed using agents provided by Microsoft with self-hosted agents with some stuff already installed. For instance, we would use some databases already provisioned into these agents. So when the test would run, all the prerequisites will be already in place. For instance, if you want to spin up some Docker containers in your pipeline, maybe you should use the self-hosted agents and already have those images present in those agents. So basically, you are shaving the yak, you are removing some time, you are keep paying, you are going to wait for on each time you're running the pipeline. So these, let's say, optimizations, the pipeline is like a living thing. It's like a child, then will grow, will become a full-grown person, right? With a lot of vices and stuff, right? Spending money and time, you know. It's 10 o'clock, you should have been in your bed sleeping. Oh, okay. You know, so it's like that. So you need to keep an eye on this pipeline, to monitor it, and to always try to see things which could be optimized. Maybe let's rewrite the tests to allow running them in parallel. So you need to change a little bit your code base. The DevOps will not do that. The developer,
exactly.
But the developer will know about this, because the DevOps will say, you know, this pipeline used to run in 5 minutes. Now it takes 15. Do something, you know. So back again to feedback, back again to collaboration, you know. Okay, I do not know how to run this in parallel because we are sharing a database. What can we do? How about you spin a container running your database for each, I don't know, a bunch of tests. So just be smart about it. But with infrastructure, you can achieve this goal. It's possible. It's possible.
I think I want to take
we are doing something like that.
Then let me just quickly take a note, because I find this really interesting. Was something new to me. I always had this picture of, I mean, like I said before, I'm not doing this on a regular basis, so most of that is just theory to me. But I find this interesting, this idea of, if I understood it correctly, of hosted agents intermixed with provisioned agents, right? Or with agents on premise. Did I get it right?
Let's call them self-hosted agents, those running in on-premise, versus
Azure hosted.
Yeah, let's call them cloud provider agents.
Yeah. The difference is that the ones are pre-built by the cloud provider and the other ones are virtual machines. They can also be in Azure. That they don't have to be on your on-premise stuff. They can be virtual machines on Azure, but you have pre-built them and set up everything that you need, and maybe throw some more resources at them, because the ones that the cloud provider gives you are quite smartphone processors and things like that.
Yeah.
And you can throw more.
Sorry, Bastian, I interrupted you. I think I didn't get anything of what you said. Sorry.
About the parallel unit tests, we are using one database per process, and I built a tool which is able to parallelize everything. So from unit tests to our custom parallel VB6 compiler. So that one assigns different IDs to every process, and every process uses its own database. So not a dedicated instance, but just a single database. So we can let run like 15, 20, 30 unit test assemblies in parallel.
But you're mentioning database all the time. So are those more like integration, automation type of tests, not just unit
integration?
Integration tests.
We are running all tests against a real database, because we made the experience that mocking those parts was more expensive and slower than running versus the actual database. So
really?
we used mock, so MOQ, as a mocking framework.
Yeah.
And setting up the mock for every test was more expensive than running against the database. So every test in our framework is inherited from a base class, which already establishes the database connection. And the database is seeded with some data before the tests even start.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I've never heard of such scenario, because I've always
and we have a transaction spanning for every single test, and never commit to the database. So every test is isolated and doesn't rely on data or is influenced by data from the past test.
And I guess you're just using different tables, so you don't get into like collisions or deadlocks or things like that, because you run them all in parallel.
Yeah, but every test assembly has its own database, so there's no locking issue, and we've got our custom built object relational mapper, which knows about these facts, that it's running in a test, and never actually commits a transaction. So the database stays clean.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because I've did solutions like that, but for integration tests, like spinning up databases in containers with predefined data, so we can run automation integration tests against those, but never for just for unit tests.
It's cheaper for us.
Interesting.
But it's our custom built solution.
Yeah,
so
it makes perfect sense.
Might not be a good fit for everyone to run his tests against a real database. But in our case, it's way cheaper than
of course.
setting up a mock.
Yeah, I built a solution using Docker Compose to spin a database for each class containing tests. Because when you're writing tests, you are usually writing methods in one class at a time. And then your mind is able to focus on all the things happening inside that class. So when you're writing your test in the same file, usually you have one class in one file, it's easier for your mind to grasp all the details. But if you need to synchronize with the stuff happening in other classes, it's harder. So I was using this philosophy. I'm creating one database per class containing integration tests. All these databases are running in Docker Compose. And I'm only spinning these containers if the unit tests have passed. So I'm also employing the fail fast. And then, because each class uses its own database, they are quite isolated. If I want to be even more draconic, I could spin one container, one database per method. But then you would have to pay the price of setting the initial state for each and every method. So you need to be, to be pragmatic and choose your isolation level. But usually with containers, what I found out, it's more portable, because you can go, today you could use Azure pipelines, tomorrow you could use Travis CI or TeamCity or something. If you build your solution around these more generic tools, your pipelines will become more portable. Maybe, what I've used is I've written a PowerShell script to start the Docker Compose workload, and then to detect based on health checks whether the database is up and running, and only then would my test run, not before, right? Yeah. So this solution is pretty portable, because if your pipeline service is able to run PowerShell scripts, then that's it. I avoid vendor lock-in. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Works on my container then, right?
Yeah. And also you could employ the same Docker Compose also on your local machine. So before I'm doing the commit and pushing against the remote repository, I run my test on my machine. And what happens usually on your machine, you have your own stuff. In production, you have other stuff. So if you could balance the things and keep the environments as close as possible to each other, then you will get faster feedback, right? You don't have to wait for the production to see that that query is not compatible with that database engine. Absolutely. So using containers, for instance, I personally believe using Docker containers is a must for any automation-related guy or gal, DevOps or whatever. I'm just closing the brackets.
I personally don't, but I guess it depends on what kind of services you use. So for me, currently, all I do is compiling, restoring with a couple of NuGet dependencies. That's fine without Docker container.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if your build process only is about compiling code and running some unit test, it's okay. But then, let's say, for instance, you want to run functional tests. So you have this automation engineer who is writing some end-to-end tests. And these tests must be run against a running instance of your application, right? The easiest way is to start a Compose workload, spinning one container per application service. And then inside the same pipeline, you run these tests. So you don't need a separate machine where your application will reside and then run your test against that machine. So from money-wise, it's cheaper, right? Because you don't have to pay for more machines. Yeah. So that's, yeah. But of course, it really depends on your context. Yeah.
You at least, I believe you can always find a a way to implement it, because if you want to do any integration tests or anything like that, Docker is simply, at least in my eyes, the way to go. And in order to avoid the vendor lock-in of my pipelines, I just make them using Nuke.
Same.
Nuke.
By the way,
Nuke.
they're all paid.
It was everywhere.
Everyone is paid, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's an important point. We don't make use of any of the CI system provided features. So we basically, every build consists of one command line call into some build system.
Yeah, but the nice thing about it is, like, you can run those same things locally, and
yeah, exactly,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I gotta say though, and let me share my screen again. And this reminded me. I was reminded before because Bastian, you said you're throwing a bunch of agents, or also Daniel said we experimented with more agents than you can count. Freedom. At the end of the day, the dev teams were happy with the speed, but then controlling got upset due to the costs. Yeah. Good point. This is something that I find personally interesting, and I also advocate at any time of the day for trying to think about vendor lock-in. What several of you have already mentioned, but it's also interesting because under certain circumstances, you want to use certain features of the CI system, right? So here I have I hope it's big enough, but here I have an example, and then that was pretty easy also to configure. I know that's not completely infrastructure anymore, what we discussed. But here's an example. You see first it run on 3 agents. The 3 is basically stands for 3 agents. 12 minutes is just a generated solution. And with 10 agents, and again, it was a single light change, it went down to something like 3 minutes. So you also can see it's not exactly times 3, or yeah, almost. But there's also a bit of overhead for compiling, etc. It's basically just a test. And also, and this is something that actually is something that, how can I say? You don't want the vendor lock-in, that's for sure. But at the same time, you also want to say no to the several features that those CI systems provide, which is sometimes something like historical data analysis and all that. And this particular one is something that leaks into the execution of the pipeline. And just as a basic understanding, so that this is from the last screenshot, this is how the agents executed. So it's 10 agents, and you see the timeline. So when they've been active, right? And you see there's a lot of potential because agent 10, for instance, could have fit behind this one. And maybe also these 2 could have stacked, because in the end, I mean, we try to optimize, or that's the goal at least. They could be pushed together, let's say, to optimize agent usage. And yeah, I think that's just one important fact that I wanted to say about vendor lock-in.
So we of course rely on historical data, but we don't rely on CI system features in the core build.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to just take the scripts I run in CI and run them locally, because I have to test what I'm pushing to CI.
The dangerous part here is just, and that's purely me speaking, but the dangerous part is those CI systems, they make it pretty easy for you to use those great, really CI features. What I meant with historical data analysis and assigning issues, and there are several others, and optimizing which build should be executed first. And they make it really easy to use those features, but only if you stay within their usual bounds, and that is excluding just invoking a script, because otherwise, if you don't use the predefined tasks or build steps or runners or whatnot, then usually you're on your own to integrate with those features to report your own statistical data, let's say. This is kind of a closing the gap there, and that's basically what I meant.
Yeah, and being able to measure is such an important thing. However, I guess some of the other things that you might be trading off, I guess it also depends on like the benefits of say going microservices. There's probably a point to where like making it a little bit faster isn't really gonna like do much, or like so you don't really have to like measure as much. I don't know, like, or maybe you're using like a different way of measuring. Like maybe it's I guess you have to do a cost benefit analysis, right, of how much you need those tools versus how much you want to be able to like sacrifice like the consistency or being able to like do a lot of these things locally and whatnot. But it is a very good point, and they do a very good job like getting you to rely on some of those features.
Yeah, but up to a point, for instance, with Azure Pipelines, I was very happy to start using it because in 2018 I was trying to experiment with .NET Core, and I was happy to find out that since Microsoft has recently bought GitHub, if your project was hosted on GitHub and it was a public, you could end up using some free resources on Azure Pipeline. And it was a hosted service. So I said, okay, fine, let's start learning it. And I started learning it and started to create my pipeline. And then I got to the point where I was trying to run some integration tests, and I was using a database. And I found out that Azure Pipelines has this Docker task. So you can start a container, and then for each port exposed by this container, Microsoft would provide you the means to export a variable. So basically, you could invoke the services running in these containers. But then what I found out was that Microsoft was pulling the Docker images before running any of your build steps. And I was saying, okay, so what if compilation fails? I've spent 2 minutes waiting for the huge Docker image to be downloaded, and then compilation fails. So that was a pretty huge setback for me. So I had to find another way, and I created this Docker Compose PowerShell script to help me out. But mainly I'm happy with what Microsoft offers. But at some point you do need to have your hands dirty, to implement stuff, custom stuff for your needs. But I mean, you can always implement your pipeline as a bunch of scripts running in a Docker container. You can run it locally. Bastian, you said that you want to run this build on your machine, right?
Yeah,
and then
of course.
Also, right? So with the Docker container, if you would just create these, I don't know, scripts, whatever, Nuke or PowerShell or Bash or something in a Docker container, you would be able to run it on your machine. And then you also be able to run it on one of these CI services. I mean, I think almost all of them support running Docker containers in these days. So, but on the other hand, you have to implement everything regarding the pipeline. What happens if you want to export a report, your test results report, code coverage chart, or other things? You should rely upon this pipeline provider to help you out, because otherwise you will just going to end up with a bunch of archives attached to your build, and then you need to manually download these artifacts and unzip on your machine, and then open that HTML file or whatever. If the pipeline provider offers you with the means to export your reports, it's going to get your work easier. With the eyes, when I first started looking at the Jenkins pipeline using the free-for, it's pretty ugly. But then TeamCity was a better eye candy. I also like to look at nice things, right? So yeah, choose your poison.
So we are using TeamCity, and there it's the issue of not having test results or rich test results, including durations, history, etc., is not an issue because you can simply use the service messages. So TeamCity is one of the CI systems which is very, very easy to provide info to. So none of the other systems has that capability, as far as I know. So I just put out some console messages and get all the features without using the vendor locked features up front. So I just call one PowerShell script and get everything I would get while using the features.
Well, Azure has a similar thing. Nuke supports it for publishing test results, code coverage.
There's one important difference, though. I mean, it depends on if that's important to you. But TeamCity also has this .NET test runner that you can use, which reports the failing tests immediately. So you don't have to wait until the test assembly is fully tested. I mean, until the end. So if you have a large test assembly that takes a couple of minutes, then with such a runner that is attached, and theoretically any system could do that, but to my knowledge, it's only TeamCity which supports it. Then you can immediately know when a build is failing from the moment the test failed on the build agent. Yeah, and not only after the results were reported. So
but it's not a runner. But it's not a runner. It's just a logger.
A logger. Sorry. I meant logger actually. And that has a better fail fast behavior basically. And that's a great thing about it, I think.
So one additional benefit which we make use of is being able to report additional information with failing tests, like screenshots, memory dumps, etc. So we don't do that in our unit tests, but in our UI tests. So every failing UI test takes a picture or pictures of all open windows with it, including if it was a timeout, it includes a memory dump, etc. And I don't want to advertise TeamCity here. I'm not paid by them, but I tried to use AppWare, I tried to use Azure DevOps, I tried to use GitHub Actions, and there's no easy way to report test results. I tried to find out how to publish test results in GitHub Actions for like 2 hours, and I didn't find out how to.
I think, I mean, we're drifting a bit from the original topic because, like I said, we have a couple of planned subtopics, more or less. But just to address that question, I think, whereas I've struggled with that idea too, to provide some more meaningful reports, etc. I can share a link with you afterwards, which at least gives you a proper notification that shows you the code where an exception occurred. But there are also ways to do actual reports, and it's called checks then for GitHub Actions, but it only works on the main, or it doesn't work for PRs at least, which is pretty limiting. Well, it helps with your own development if you're in a public maintainer or something. Maybe for GitHub Enterprises that would work too, but I'm just speaking from my own experience. For OSS, it's completely unusable in that case because you need the GitHub token which is only provided or not provided for PRs. So there's that. I have a couple of questions left. Didn't really go through actually what I've given you up front, but one thing that might be interesting is
lightning round, speed talking. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Yeah, each of you will get one question, and you have 10 seconds to properly address it. Okay? No, but one question that is of personal interest for me, because I have absolutely no idea, is what are the ongoing challenges you think in infrastructure? So I guess we always moved moved into a direction where things got a bit easier, or yeah, as you said, first there was a big mess. So first it was easy, then it got a lot more complex. Now it finds back together. But is there anything particular that you would say are ongoing challenges in that area, which could be made better?
Well, yeah. The some of these were kind of addressed earlier as well, but like the complexity of choices that you have. So that requires kind of different roles, I guess, for people to play, like consultants or, you know, somebody who's a solutions architect, and working with them to help you decide on what you want. It's also harder if you're just getting into like understanding infrastructure, to be able to grasp the stuff as much as you would have had you had to deal with, like, you know, the heavy pizza boxes that you would rack into a data center and like build and like switch out the components and like put in the cables. I used to rack servers in Heels, by the way. Like, I know I like mention that sometimes, but like that's one thing that I don't have to do anymore, so it's a nice thing. But you know, you don't really get to see those things kind of physically coming together. And like me, I am a very visual learner, and like I learn by doing. So like, you know, by connecting things and putting things together, and like even like building virtual machines and taking care of operating systems was something that, you know, like I got better knowledge from that than say like now if I were, you know, say like purely a developer, somebody who hasn't really had much access to this kind of stuff or much knowledge in that kind of stuff. Trying to understand it now, it can be a little bit more difficult because a lot of that stuff has been abstracted away. It could be a positive and it could be a negative in some sense. And I think that like there are two sides to a lot of these coins. And the like cost transparency is a big one. Like we've mentioned before, where you kind of have to set alerts on costs and really do a lot of research on, you know, what a specific service would cost you and what pieces of it you would have to pay for, whether it's just storage bandwidth or if it's resources like CPU time, or if it's something else like a different, I guess, different like types of virtual machines that you get would have different types of costs. And that is difficult. Also with all these offerings, even things like containers aren't completely straightforward because, like, say you're using Azure Kubernetes Service. One thing that you might run into is some things might be supported only in Linux for Linux containers, and some things might be only supported for Windows. I guess that makes it more important. Like first of all, it makes it more important to standardize, like provide guidelines for people to be able to like build their services in ways that would work with the infrastructure. It would, what was I trying to say? Just lost my train of thought. But yeah, like things like and the different like tiers of it too. Like say you wanted to use Windows containers, and they're only available if you use this type of AKS setup, and so like
Jesus,
it's important.
what's AKS?
Azure Kubernetes
Azure
Service.
Kubernetes Service.
Of course.
Yes. But you could also host your containers on app services if you wanted to. I mean, you can host your containers in multiple ways as well, but you just have to understand that like you might have to have like separate solutions for like Windows things and Linux things, which means that like, well, it's a great thing with .NET Core that it's cross-platform, but if you have legacy applications and like some newer things that you're building here, you might have to, you know, have .NET Framework support, which is Windows only, or you know, it's not super straightforward. So yeah, there's a lot of
Continuous fragmentation.
Yes,
more or
yes.
less. One point that basically speaks for what Bogdan said before of trying to standardize and having one tool or solution that kind of roots all. Which may, I don't know, in certain cases may provide a little less features, maybe, but overall be of a more standardized way.
Yeah, it's that cost benefit analysis you have to do. You have to understand like what kind of trade-offs there are. And standardization doesn't mean like, you know, standardize on every single thing, but at least come up with like a certain like common sets of things that you want to standardize to make things go faster. Like say you wanted to build a new service and you didn't know how, you just knew how to write business logic. You're a new developer, like you're like, this is a completely foreign territory for you, but you want to build a service fast because you know the type of business logic that you want to write. So like, you know, having .NET templates, for instance, and like standard ways of like saying like, this is the minimum thing that you need. And if you're using specific Azure offerings like Azure App Configuration, like have those wired up, or at least the logic for it wired up in there as well. Like have a lot of these like common tools, like say you want to use Serilog for all of your logging, you know, you can have that wired up there already ready to go. So when you have to work on features and you have to go fast, you can like quickly spin up services. And then that's like another thing about microservices is you're supposed to be able to like rewrite them quickly if you needed to. You can rewrite them in a day or two. So this and like we're talking about like microservices, not like, you know, say domain services that might have a few like little things, or you know, like monoliths. Like clearly you're not going to rewrite a monolith in a day, but if you know, if you enable that, then you can at least like work on your feature output when this is already set up with, you know, and like, I don't want to talk about my presentation, but the presentation that I did had like, you know, an API, had Terraform for infrastructure as code, had Nuke for some like build automation, like all of this kind of was already there in a template. So all people had to do is just like spin it up, and it was wired up to go based on like what their setup is. So like you still have to worry about things like credentials, but other than that, like everything else should be good. So I think like that's where standardization really comes from, and yeah, so, or really helps in.
It's really unfortunate that we didn't manage to get back to that. I guess meanwhile it's almost time to close, right? But for everyone who is interested, well, maybe you can pull the link or something for YouTube and share it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because that's something we could do at least. Regarding the question, Tura maybe or something. I mean, the question I had with what are ongoing challenges for you? What has where do you see potential?
It's kind. You see,
You can also
it's really hard.
A stupid question, yeah.
No, it's really hard because there are so many challenges, and to be honest, most of the challenges that I face lately is not infrastructure or how we do infrastructure, but it's people and how they approach that, how they approach this whole concept of not only infrastructure but DevOps in general. And I'm saying that because funny thing that we mentioned standardization, which is an awesome thing, and it really sounds like something that will really help us. But if we try, the minute that you try to every time you face the nasty stuff below, because you say, okay, I want to standardize things. I want to be able to be more portable. Even these are wild dreams, but some people try to be vendor independent in terms of infrastructure. Like, I have all my services in Azure. I just want to take them and put them in AWS. That, at least in my experience, never works at all. No matter how hard you try, there are always some things that are catching you from the bottom of the sea, dragging you back into that place. And it's the same thing with Docker containers. It's the same thing with Kubernetes. Like Olga said, okay, I'm going to use AKS, and I'm going to have some Windows containers. But those Windows containers, they don't really work the same way on your Windows server. For example, if you try to spin them there in order to do some tests, you start having some permission issues, and you start wondering, okay, it's a standardized technology, why it doesn't work standardized?
We're working, running Windows and Linux containers side by side.
I have that, and it's I still have nightmares about that. We have Windows and Linux containers together, and I've broken so many keyboards over that. They never work. When you try to run Docker in experimental mode so that you can support them both, nothing ever works as it's supposed to.
If you're interested, you can.
Sure.
You know what? While you're saying, sorry, I was about to say the bad word. Things are not working. I'm sitting here in my space on my keyboard doesn't work, so I just copy one space that I have and use Control Insert, paste. Professional developer. I was just looking for Olja's YouTube video, and I will share it momentarily. And that was basically all I wanted to say, because the video started I didn't actually say something. It was just a video when I was with Olja on stream. So there's that. Professionals.
Yeah. Okay. So just to wrap up all of my ranting, because when I talk about this, I feel like I'm just ranting about it and complaining. But
it feels so good.
I'm really looking forward to the about culture thing that we may have, because that's. I mean, people are really interesting creatures, right?
Yeah. So to sum up, I have many challenges, and exactly the missing link of real standardization is really killing me, at least at the moment, because I'm trying to push all of those things in our company. And I say, okay, if we just use those containers, it will be great. Okay, can we try it out here? Let's try it.
Well,
it blows up in my face, and everybody just hates me afterwards.
That's why you have to get their input as well. It's a very, that's why communication is important. And you have to make people excited and understand why this is going to benefit them in the long run. And then they will be more likely to work with you. So they need to know what's in it for them besides getting paid to do their job. But, we all want to, feel like we're we're listened to, and like this is going to benefit us. So, I feel like they might have some feedback for that. And you could see that instead of like being sad about it and upset about it, use it as a learning opportunity and get excited about it. And then like help that with your standardization, like bring it back.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll stop hijacking the conversation.
Oh, no. That's perfectly fine.
Finally.
Yeah, maybe that will work. I'm trying my best to be positive about that. But yeah. In 2 words, it's hard.
What is hard?
Infrastructure. DevOps.
Being human is hard.
42.
I think I learned a few things or two today. At least I got that it's not completely easy and I'm too stupid. It's just enormously complex. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Or can be.
It's a universe of its own.
Okay, what else did I have as questions? Now looking back at my questions, some of those were really stupid, I feel. No, I mean the questions that I listed in our chat before. Okay. Yeah, anyone has a closing word or wants to say something that we talked over or something before?
I'm glad I'm not using Docker.
No, don't get me wrong.
And I'm glad I don't rely on cloud providers.
I love it. I love Docker, and I want to use it everywhere all the time. Just with Linux, I don't want to use Windows.
Yeah, I'd like to try them, but we've currently got no time to try that.
What did you say? Windows or Linux? Sorry, I know these.
He wants to do Linux Windows containers.
No. I want to do
all the time.
No.
Okay. No Windows containers.
No Windows containers. No Windows anything. Thank you.
Under certain circumstances, would be, I don't know. For instance, I wanted to compile some Visual Studio extensions. I think, as far as I know, they only work on Windows, so you have to have certain things installed and all. And well, meanwhile, for local development, you either use I don't know, VMware or Parallels. But yeah, a bit off topic maybe. By the way, it's funny, Bogdan, you have this integrated glitch effect for your camera.
Wi-Fi.
Very cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, cyberpunk. Yeah, that's why.
Unintentional.
Okay, people, friends, let's call it a day. Maybe. Are you up for that? Usually, I would say beers next, but you can have
so we
that
can
on
talk
your
about
own.
this more because we could all talk about this and vent about this all day.
Yeah, I'm going to grab beer. Are we doing it?
Once I had a call with my friends, and it was really funny because they're in Austria and they have at some point they have lifted curfew and all that, and we set up a call because I'm not living in Austria, and I was wondering, okay, I had a meeting with two of them and one wasn't coming. And then at one point, the one that was already there went back into his kitchen, and then the other one came. He was at his place, and yeah, that was just very funny. And it would be cool if we could do the same, me like walking in behind your back, giving you the beer. That would be cool. But maybe
you could always do that thing where like it's like you can like pass me you can like pass a beer off to the side, and then I can have like somebody else like come in and like pass me a beer locally.
Okay,
or just like pretend to grab it. Hold on, I don't which side is it coming from?
Just put it downstairs.
There you go. I feel like it needs some refinement. Anyway.
We're like clowns, basically. Sorry.
I mean, if you can't have fun, then
let's close here. I think at least, I mean, today was cool. I still gotta say, I'm looking forward to maybe the next episodes, because that's more about what I'm personally really interested. It's just a slightly different level. It was really nice having you all here. And yeah, let's have a good evening, everyone. Oya will have a good day, right?
Yeah, I gotta finish work.
And see you another time. Right?
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. Bye.
Thanks everyone for watching. So see